thank you so much for inviting me to lead this. I'm really excited to be speaking to this extraordinary panel. I'll give you brief introductions, and then I'm going to let them give you a little bit more insight into their work. So first, to my left here, is Dr. Bethany Het-Gauthier, who's an associate professor of global health and social medicine at the medical school at Harvard, and also an associate professor in the biostatistics department at the School of Public Health at Harvard. And she is a biostatistician by training, specializing in health systems and implementation science research in sub-Saharan Africa, with interests in statistical methods for program monitoring and evaluation, digital health applications, surgical care access and outcomes, COVID-19 surveillance, and power dynamics and equity in global health research collaborations. Welcome, Bethany. Really happy to have you. To her left is Dr. Summer Dean, who is currently a data and applied scientist at Microsoft, and has previously held positions at IBM, at UNICEF, working in polio monitoring, and at the World Bank. She has experience in policy design and program implementation in the context of marketing analytics, health sector management, communication strategy development, and natural resource allocation. And she did her doctoral work at Cornell, where she worked on topics related to analytic modeling of climate change. And finally, at the end is Dr. Karen Zhang. She is the George M. Bunker Professor and Associate Professor of Operations Management at the MIT Sloan School of Management, right next door. And her research focuses on fundamental and emerging operations management problems in the context of food and agricultural supply chains, environmentally and socially responsible operations, supply chain information sharing, and pricing and revenue management. So welcome to everybody, really happy to have you. First, I'm gonna let you each talk for maybe about 5 minutes, just giving a high-level overview of your work to everybody, maybe highlighting a few specific examples of problems that you're working on right now, and then we can dive into some more general questions. So Bethany, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's really such an honor to join such incredible scientists at today's event. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about my trajectory to come to quantitative global health, and then talk about some of the work that I'm working on. And I always am enthusiastic for a chance to talk about my two professional loves, quantitative sciences and health equity, and how I merge those in my work. So again, thank you. So I came to this work organically, a bit by happenstance, and that started with a degree in mathematics from UNC Chapel Hill. And when I graduated, there were two options that were put before me. One option was to be an actuary, and the second was to be a scientist with the Navy. And neither of them felt like the right fit in terms of my personal interest and how I thought I wanted to spend my day-to-day time. So I chose option 3, which I went into the US Peace Corps as a high school math teacher for 3 years in northern Namibia. And it was an incredible experience. If some of you may know about Namibia's history, but it was ruled under South Africa under an apartheid system, and as part of the apartheid system, math and science education was systematically denied from primary school. And so part of my role as a high school math teacher was to bridge the gap as they were doing intensive training programs to have math teachers in the high school. And that exposure was really the formation of my career. I learned two important things, many important things, but two I think relevant to this conversation. The first was just how important it is to provide education opportunities for those of us who love math, and to really cultivate that love and interest in quantitative sciences, and how quickly you can change an individual's career or an infrastructure or an institutional opportunities through those opportunities. The second thing I was really made aware of during that time is the gross inequities in health access around the world. The community I lived in Namibia had a 25% HIV prevalence, and this was pre-testing, pre-treatment. And so seeing how the epidemic was really affecting my students, the family I lived with, the community I lived in, gave me this inspiration and motivation to try and find the intersection between that love of math and health equity work. So that's how I found my way to biostatistics. I came to Harvard School of Public Health for a 2-year master's 19 years ago, and I swore I would only stay for 2 years. That's all I could handle of New England cold. But here I am 19 years later. I've moved a half a block professionally. I'm now at the medical school. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I'm able to do in my day-to-day now, which I typically put into 3 buckets. So the first bucket is health systems research. And a good example of that right now is working with colleagues in Rwanda, trying to understand access to cesarean care in rural Rwanda and ways that we can address some of the barriers that women might face either to access cesareans or to recover safely after. There is definitely a data science quantitative component to that. So one of our flashier components of the work is developing a machine learning algorithm that can identify women who are at high risk of surgical site infection using an image of their surgical wound. And we're able to then identify women at high risk at their home, so save those who are recovering safely the trip back to the hospital, and then to more urgently refer women who need access to care. And so that definitely fits within the theme of what we're talking about here. But one of the things I love about my work is the data science and statistical components. It's just one small piece of it. So a lot of my work is qualitative work to understand the needs of the communities, their perceptions and acceptance of these various algorithms. A lot of my work is policy and health systems analysis to try to think about how these different tools integrate in. And so there's a wide variety and flavor to the work, a lot of different collaborators involved, and for me it makes it exciting and interesting to think about it from all different angles. The second bucket I think about my work in is in statistical methods development and extensions. Rachel and I have a shared PhD student that fits in that bucket. And it's really trying to think about the quantification needs of different programs that I support, and when there isn't an off-the-shelf method that we can use to address those quantification needs, to try and work with other statisticians and students to think about how we can adapt methods to fit those needs. So, and again, a motivating example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the countries that we were supporting had access to testing much later than we had access to in the US, but they still wanted to be able to identify potential outbreaks. And so we extended some time series analysis methods to be able to integrate into the existing health management information systems to do syndromic surveillance in real time to flag potential outbreaks of COVID-19 for sites, who then went in and said, okay, at these sites, are we seeing true outbreaks of the pandemic? So that's the second bucket, is methods development, and I really love that because it allows me a chance to explore different methods with folks who are focusing on specific methodologies that could be adapted for the context that I work. And then the third bucket really links back to that experience I had in Namibia of this passion for education as a tool to change trajectories, both of individuals who have a love for quantitative sciences, but also for institutions who really want to try and implement the best health programs that they possibly can. And so the perfect example, and I say this with apologies because I'm actually getting on the flight tonight, is I'll be teaching the next 2 weeks in Rwanda a mathematical modeling for epidemic preparedness training. And so a lot of that work is, again, identifying the needs as expressed by collaborators, by ministries of health, of where they might have some existing gaps in their ability to understand their health programs, and then leading trainings to bridge those gaps. So again, happy to be here, really excited to hear the questions that you might have, and look forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. That was a wonderful introduction and very inspiring. So I'm very, very honored to be here and be part of this panel. I also wanted to appreciate all the lightning talks. Your research is, you may think that you're working in a small cosm, but collectively it's very, very inspiring. And I'd love to hear more about you guys once you are presenting as part of your poster presentations. A little bit about me. I will also talk a bit about my journey into data science and what motivated me to be where I am today. I'll also pick out 2 projects that I've done in the climate change space so that there's some relevance to the panel. Is there a back thing from this?
Turn mine off. So
Can you hear me, or should I leave this? All right. I'm going to leave it on. All right. So I started with an undergrad in computer sciences, and that was over 20 years ago. And back then, the only career that you could have as a computer scientist was as a software engineer, and that's not what I wanted to do. My love for the environment was always it always overtook what I did in my for coding in C++ and C. I just didn't see the linkage. And so I went straight into working for an environmental agency. And there they said, well, you're a computer scientist. We don't think you're an environmentalist. So, it was very hard for me to make that career transition. And so from there, I said, all right, maybe I should do a degree in public policy. And I went to Cornell, and I did a master's in public policy. And there, I was really exposed to all the different ways that you can impact the public sector through research, but also through engaging your time through computer sciences. And so that's where I started seeing the linkage of data, of being able to do modeling and actually having an impact in the public sector. And so I went on to work for UNICEF and for the World Bank in public health. And very quickly I realized that if you want to leverage data, and if you want to leverage data intelligently, just knowing what a policy is and how to implement a policy is not enough. You should be literate in data. And that led me to my journey to wanting to do a PhD in biostatistics. And again, I went back to my love for the environment, and I said, I'll do a PhD in natural resources. And I started studying climate change. I started looking at the impact of floods and how flooding impacts communities. I looked at poverty traps, and all this information led me to looking at big data, looking at NASA satellite data. And while a lot of my advisors were looking at the impact at the small local scale, I wanted to scale my research to look at it at the global impact. So the research that I did in Indonesia was looking at how large stochastic changes in sea surface temperature link to human health. And when you look at the studies and the literature, people will pick a small community in Indonesia and look at the impact of health, but I wanted to scale it up. And I quickly came into the world of big data, and data science was like the sexiest job of the century, and I just got so obsessed with it. I was like, I want to work in the sexiest industry. And well, we can talk about that offline, but anyway, it was something that really inspired me. And I basically switched careers, and again, the career transition was not easy. Going from a natural resource degree and trying to convince a recruiter that, well, hire me in your marketing department wasn't an easy conversation. But anyway, I was able to convince them, and hence I ended up at IBM, and I was solving problems like really helping IBM make more money by making their processes more efficient, and very, very detailed data modeling, and using millions and millions of data points to answer questions that would operationalize processes, make them more efficient, replace human judgment and bias with a recommendation from a machine that would then be implemented and carried out. And I'd really love to talk about how when we think about machine learning and when we think about results of models, it doesn't really end there. It starts with first understanding the data problem, starting with understanding the data, operationalizing it. Building the model is like literally less than 5% of the work. The remaining work is convincing someone to use the model, convincing someone to believe in the model, and making sure that your model isn't biased. So one of the other interests that I've had is really thinking deeply about what is a trustworthy model. Are my results biased? And if my results are biased, who am I impacting? Right? So being very thoughtful in the entire end-to-end process of building the model. But anyway, one of the climate-related projects that I have done, because this is a climate panel, one of the projects that I did was really scaling human health, looking at biological populations, looking at how they impact health, not in human communities, but also the health of the ecosystem. So that was one theme of projects that I worked on. But within industry, it was really interesting when you think of climate change and its impact in industry. I found myself in a very, very different set of problems. The problems that industries have to solve for is, at least at the climate front, at the moment, all that's required of them is to report on their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And when you start talking to companies, when you start looking at their data, most companies' data is geared towards marketing reporting, payments reporting, how much revenue they're making, what is happening, how do they make their own internal processes efficient. But when it comes to how much carbon they're emitting, the data is not as mature. So you can't even bring in a machine learning model until you clean the house. So they're at a very, very nascent, very early stage of their data for climate reporting. So my work was mostly involved in helping them get their house in order and bringing the data science, the optimization, helping them make better decisions to have a cleaner future. Those things are way, way into the future. And we would hope that industry would move faster towards it. Some industries are further along the way than others, but data science as far as Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions is very early in its journey in the corporate sector. I'll pause here and I'll hand it off to
Thank you.
Karen.
It's fascinating to hearing the two panelists sharing their experience and their journey. I think mine is a little bit less dramatic compared to what you have heard. So I am literally straight from school into school. So I was from China, and I did my undergrad and master's in China, and I came to the U.S. It's really for the experience, as someone that has never left the country for like 23 years. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I wanted to see the world. And so I applied to a PhD program here. And at that time, it's really, I think for Chinese people, it's like applying for, if you are educated and good at school, I think the easiest way to get out of the country and come to the United States is to apply for a PhD program, actually. That's what I did. That's the path I followed. And then luckily I got an offer from a decent school, Stanford University. And so I did my PhD training there in management science and engineering. Being in academia, being a professor was not like, I dreamed of it since childhood. It's not like that. So I really came here for the experience. I wanted to, come and experience a different culture, a different country than my home country, even my home city. And I really developed this passion for doing research while I was doing my PhD at Stanford. Thanks to my advisors there, brought very interesting problems to me. And my research actually focused a lot on human behavior. And I started out trying to understand how we can utilize behavioral insights to help improve efficiency of supply chains. And then over time, I started to develop a passion for sustainability. And when I think about sustainability, it's actually both the environmental and the social perspective of sustainability. As I developed that passion for doing research, I found that being in academia is really one very promising way that I can continue to pursue that passion. And that's why I entered academia, and again, with good fortune, I landed a job at Sloan. So that's how I landed at MIT. And so a bit about my research interest, sustainability issues in global supply chains, basically. So I'm trying to, integrate or connect sustainability with the supply chain, right? And I think that you know, supply chain plays a big role in affecting sustainability, and I'm particularly interested in understanding or looking into sustainability issues in the first mile of the supply chain, very upstream of the supply chain. And it really connects with my origin of coming from a developing country. So a lot of my research focused on that first mile, a very upstream part of the global supply chain. And most recently, I have focused a lot in the food and ag sector, and doing a lot of projects in countries like China, India, Southeast Asia, etc., to try to think about how we can help improve the welfare of people in that upstream of the global supply chain. There are a lot of, I'm sure you are familiar with, a lot of issues that were happening there, both in terms of environmental impact as well as a social impact, right? We have heard of a lot of issues of labor practices, or not very good labor practices in the upstream of the global supply chains that often cost people lives. We know that a lot of the smallholder producers and farmers in the ag sector in these countries were exploited, and they feel very insecure in terms of financial and just their livelihood. And so I really wanted to contribute to help improve the welfare and well-being of these disadvantaged communities in these countries. And that's really kind of where my passion is right now, and have been doing research in that area in the past few years. So to just give some examples, in the past few years, I've been collaborating with a number of government and non-government organizations in India to try to see how we can leverage digital technologies, platforms, mobile apps to better empower smallholder farmers, both in terms of their production decisions as well as their marketing decisions, how we can open up provide better information access to these farmers so that they can improve productivity, but also at the same time open up sales channel or marketing channel so that they have more opportunities for raising their income using this type of technologies. And then another kind of stream of my work looks at this topic on transparency, because I think that a lot of the issues that we see about sustainability and all of this tragedy, a lot of time is that we do not actually have transparency or visibility into what's going on and what's happening in this very upstream part of the supply chain. And so to address those problems, we really want to start by gaining that visibility. And I think I resonate a lot with what Salma was saying, is that that's not really a big data problem. It's a small data problem. Is that we don't have the data. We don't have the visibility of what are the practices, right? Environmental, what is the carbon footprint? Labor practices, how are workers being treated in these factories? What are the health and safety conditions in these factories? There's very, very limited visibility. Even if you ask some of the most, the global companies of today, they can tell you a lot about their first immediate tier 1 suppliers, but once you start to ask tier 2, tier 3, raw material, they have very, very little visibility. So another stream of my work is also trying to look at how we can encourage and incentivize and motivate these big players, right, in the corporate world to improve visibility into their supply chain so that they can find where issues are, what are the challenges, and how we can improve them, how we can improve upon the practices. I hope it's not mine. No, no one's calling me. Yeah, and so and that's the a parallel stream of my work. And I mentioned at the beginning that a lot of my work looks at human behavior because, as you can imagine, the type of problems in the system that I look at are full of people. And without understanding the behavioral aspect, I don't think any solutions that we develop would be effective. Because in the end, I think, again, connects very well to the previous two panelists, is that, again, in the end, you want people to use the systems. You want people to use these models. So you need to understand how we can get people to adopt. How would people behave or respond to the systems and the solutions that you deploy in their environment? And so, part of what I like about my research is that I also do a lot of experiments. So I would design, kind of decision experiments that will recruit people to come and make decisions in certain environment and observe, how effective different types of interventions and nudges are in order to try to achieve kind of the desirable outcome that we want to achieve. And so I would say that my research is very multidisciplinary. Being trained as an engineer, I definitely do a lot of quantitative work, mathematical models and stuff like that. But I also spend a good deal of amount of time in the field because I believe that, you only see the problem, you can only understand the real problem by being there and talking to the people at the origin of the problem. And so I felt very sad that COVID-19 was like, prevent me from traveling to these regions to really continue pursue my research. But thankfully, I hope that we're getting back to more normal times now that we can travel again and go back to the field. And then I also have, the intersection with the social science and the, kind of the behavioral aspect of things that, and that multidisciplinary approach is really something that I felt really interested and excited about. So I'm happy to share more about my particular project or the particular things that excite me, particular challenges that I face in my research in the follow-up Q&A. So I'll stop here. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was a really, really fascinating description of your work, and really excited to chat sort of more informally now about, sort of connections between all of your work. So I think a lot of you were giving some little examples of the types of data challenges that you face in your work. You were saying lack of testing data in your context. You were just talking, Karen, about lack of data on the early levels of the supply chain. I'm hoping you might be able to give a little bit more, since we're in a data science crowd here, I'm hoping you might be able to give a little more detail into kind of the specific types of data challenges that you face in your work, and what kinds of data collection or methodological advancements that might be needed to start to make progress in each of your areas. Just an example or two.
I guess it's my turn to start first, since
Sure.
I was the last.
Yeah.
So I mentioned about the small data problem, and that's very true when you think about the first mile of the supply chain. And I think apart from, so there are two levels of the problem. One is just there's no infrastructure to collect the data to begin with. Like if you think about, I'll just take the example of agricultural supply chains, right? The agricultural landscape. In these developing countries, in India, in Africa, in China, the majority of these producers are very, very small, right? Household producers. They literally just, grow crops in the backyard of their house, of their home, have less than 2.5 acres of land, right? So it's very, very small and very distributed and fragmented. And so, first of all, to develop that infrastructure to collect data on such a fragmented infrastructure is by itself, a daunting task. And there's no standardized, right, kind of system or policy or anything in place. Governments are not exactly interested in collecting that level of data to help kind of the system optimization. So that's really the challenge here, right? It's the fragmentation, this geographical distribution of the little data points, right? If you want to think about, okay, I want to collect yield data on all these farms. I think about millions of farms that is spread throughout the entire country. How are you going to be able to collect that data, even just yield data, right, efficiently? That's, itself, it's a big challenge. But I do think that there's some exciting opportunities that are rising. And of course, different countries, these advancements at different levels, at different countries. For example, one of the collaborators that I work with is the state government of Karnataka in India. And they have, I think, in 2014, they actually launched this statewide platform, digital platform. Part of the goal is really to try to regulate wholesale transactions of some of the most important commodities in the state, to provide more transparency, to provide farmers with better bargaining power, etc. But then as a side product, they are also starting to collect all the data, right? So the supply data, the pricing data, because now transaction is being regulated, being conducted on this platform rather than a very manual process. And so the platform is developed not for the sole purpose of collecting data, but as a side product. As a result, it started to collect data. And so that it really enables a lot of very powerful research that can be done in terms of how we can think about better design the mechanism used, the pricing mechanism used on these platforms to even providing better bargaining power for these farmers. So that was one of the projects that I engaged in. But for example, in China, I haven't had such luck in the sense that there's not such a big, large enough player to collect that systematic level of data. And so the research has been relatively more fragmented, or that we actually need to invest a lot on our side to do the data collection itself. Right? So sometimes the research is collecting the data is actually a very big part of the research before you can even do analysis on the data. I think the second thing I wanted to mention is, again, tying back to the behavior aspect. If you think about trying to address environmental and social problems in these upstream supply chains, one of the things that you would want to get is at least compliance data, right? At least what is the emissions, right? What is the wage and working hours and labor practices that are currently being used in these factories. But there are a lot of behavioral barriers of actually getting systematic level of that kind of data, both in the sense that a lot of times these factory owners or suppliers do not have the incentive to provide you that data, and they might have the incentive to not provide you with that data. And then also a lot of time that these suppliers are actually not educated to feel that these are important problems for them. Because for a lot of time, they are in survival mode, right? They're trying to provide an opportunity for these people that otherwise have no other employment opportunities to work and make a living and earn income for their family. And so for a lot of these small to medium size of vendors or of suppliers in the upstream supply chain, a lot of times it's not only just like you need to collect the data, but you actually need to educate the people that it's important to collect that data to help improve practices. And so I think that there are two levels that actually compound together to make it kind of a challenging aspect. So I'll stop here and let the two panelists share their experience as well. Yeah.
So while Karen has elaborated upon some of the challenges with collecting data from the scope 3, the scope 1, and scope 2 perspective, which really aggregate up to companies, I want to bring in a different perspective. Having too little data is a problem. Not having enough data is a problem. But the other problem that I've faced is there's too much data, and what do you do with it? And when there's too much data, there's also data being developed within silos. So when you want to think about the big picture and when you want to think about journeys, let's just take the example of a user. You start your journey with a company by showing interest in a product, and then the end of the journey is that you bought the product and you keep buying it again and again. You would think that a company has all that information and it's beautifully laid out for a data scientist to come and plug it into a machine learning model. Well, it doesn't work like that. It almost never works like that. And for those of you who are interested in careers in data science and machine learning, I would really urge you to think about the full journey of how you leverage data and take it to a point where somebody's going to use it. And there you want to think about being savvy with engineering the data and connecting all these dots, and not just connecting it from like thinking of it like a simple merge. You have to become really creative as a data scientist. You're talking to different departments within an organization. They have their way of thinking about what their side, so like let's say the web content people, they will envisage a user one way, and then the payments people will envisage the user in a certain way. Now you have to become creative in how you communicate with these different departments, and then you're bringing and connecting all these disparate, siloed pieces into one full journey to then be able to model the behavior of the user. Now that's just the beginning of the journey of the data science lifecycle. Once you've done this, then you need to think about, all right, what are the different methodologies that I'm going to leverage? How am I going to model this user's behavior? Do I choose a black box approach where I'm just going to throw everything into a natural language process and expect magic? Or am I going to be very, very thoughtful in how I want to model this behavior? What are the assumptions that I'm going to take? If you go back to the first presentation that we had about complex systems, every system that you'll model is invariably a complex system. And whatever model you want to force into it, whether it's a Poisson, whether it's logistic regression, whether it's a random forest, you're bringing within it your assumptions, and really then you're getting any results out of it, but then being very, very transparent and cautious about how you're leveraging this data, what the assumptions are, what are the limitations, what are the biases, and then when I'm finally presenting this data, are people going to buy into it, and are they going to trust it? Are they going to implement it? And is there a stakeholder that's going to say, I vouch for this, make it work, make decisions based on this intelligent system? So, we can think of data, again, coming back to scope 1, scope 3, and the climate problem, where when companies are drowning in data on one side, the other side where you have climate change and you have sustainability research, that's very, very limited. There's little data in that world, but then luckily you have methods like Bayesian modeling and all these other amazing tools that some of you scientists will go on to develop as AI researchers, which really help companies and individuals leverage to then draw insights from these small pools of data. On to you.
Everything they said. I think just briefly, two things. Whoops, I don't think I'm on. I think two things come to mind for me. One is, how do you address data issues? I mean, a lot of it, and I think both of the speakers touched on this. It's just brute force. I mean, there's so much brute force of just like going out to the field and really setting up the systems to get the data. And we really, for us, our team leading the data collection are engaged in the work as much as the most senior PI, because if we don't understand what they're doing and they don't understand what we're doing, the whole thing falls apart. So there is a lot of brute force effort to get the data that we get. The other part that I would say is, in the context of data challenges, being really more thoughtful about the methods. And so a lot of the work that I do is looking at, there's 1,000 ways you can do syndromic surveillance, right? So in the context of the data that we know has missing data, in the context of the data that we know has data aberrations, which of those methods are most robust to those data issues, and then advocating for those methods to be integrated into the work that we do. So really trying to be critical of the methods that we use and evaluate them, not in a lot of times the methods are developed in the most ideal data setting, but to evaluate how those methods hold up when the data isn't adhering to perfect structures.
Yeah, thanks. Great conversation, guys. I think we're running low on time. I do want to ask one more question that I feel is important. I'll start with you, Bethany. So, as data scientists working in low and middle income country settings, can you speak to the importance of having this, in-country, local team of collaborators, and what can we do to really ensure that those collaborators get sort of proper credit and that we have equitable partnerships?
Really important question, and happy to give a quick answer now and then talk about it for hours, if that allows. I mean, I think for any of our work, no matter where you're working, having that link to the people who are generating the problems, to the people who would use the information, is incredibly important. And I don't think that's specific to my work in Rwanda. I think that's specific to your work in Boston and to anywhere in the world. And really, the impact of my work is as limited as my ability to get it into a situation where it's impactful. And so I really do develop close collaborations with collaborators, including, like I said, taking the time to invest in data scientists on the ground who can work independent of any support from me or teams in Boston to be able to answer the questions that they have. I do think it's a little bit tricky, so a lot of my time, and I don't know if this is the source of the question, but a lot of the time in my writing is about how we engage collaborators and how we engage partners, because inherently, again, I think this is globally true. There are power dynamics between people who hold the research positions and who hold the methodologic tools in the communities that we try to serve through our work. And that's true globally. It's exacerbated in the work that I do because of the power dynamics of coloniality and of racism and how that manifests in our work. And so I think us really thinking about how we can restructure the way we approach partners, the way we engage partners, the way we reward partners, definitely have some ideas of how we can do that, but I think just even having the conversation of why that's important is a good starting point.
Thanks, Bethany. I think I'll open it up to a quick question from the audience, if there are any, since we're running super low on time. I saw over there a hand first.
Thank you. My question would be to Bethany. Firstly, congratulations on your work. I think it's amazing. You mentioned that a lot of your work is also qualitative besides being quantitative. Do you see any times these two approaches clashing? And if it does, which approach do you put your faith in? Thank you.
Ooh, I thought you were going to say where they work together, and I was all ready to answer that question. You know, like everything is complex, right? And so, you know, trying to decide what my family is going to have for dinner tonight is going to be one of the most complex decisions I have to make today. And taking all these different opinions and pieces of information and synthesizing that into a decision is really hard. You know, I don't ever see it necessarily as a clash, as necessarily more of a like different perspectives, right? And how do you balance those perspectives? I will say I really have become humbled by how much I've learned from the qualitative work and how, you know, just blatantly ignorant I was to the importance of that through my quantitative training, and really listening to people give the story behind the data. That's a great question, and hopefully next time I'm asked that question, I'll have a better answer for it.
Maybe, do we have time for one more question, Zeus? Okay. I think I saw the hand right here next.
Thank you so much for this great conversation. I actually have some questions from all of you. The first question is, how do we find the opportunities to help in under-resourced communities, et cetera? Because as junior faculty, we really don't know where to look to help. And then the second question was, as Bethany was saying, there is a crisis with people on site not really doing this and us always doing this. Are there opportunities for us to do training for people on site and helping them out? Thank you so much.
I can take that question. It's really piggybacking off what Bethany was saying. Like, it's so important to make those strategic relationships even before you start the work. The role of the stakeholder is pivotal in the success of your project, because it's the stakeholder that will use the insights that you offer to them, and they're the ones who are responsible for ensuring that your insights, whatever methodology you propose, whatever researchers you send their way, that they would actually implement them. And often in an ideal situation, you want the stakeholder to propose, come to you with the problem. And I know it's not ideal, but I can give you a brief example of a project that was so successful. The head of the Punjab Institute of Technology board was inspired by an idea of combating corruption through data. He was so inspired by it that he bought into this idea that my manager, actually my boss at the World Bank, was advocating. And the data systems, the data collection was owned by the stakeholder, and it was their responsibility to make sure that the results were being monitored, that the recommendations were being carried forward. So you want to have a close partnership, and then have that trust, develop that trust, and then work towards fulfilling the goals that you have for your project.
I agree with what has been said. I mean, yeah, having the right stakeholders in the relationship definitely important. I think that, particularly related to sustainability problems, and if you are thinking about low to middle income countries, sometimes it takes a bit of entrepreneurship, regardless of what stage are you in your career. I would encourage you just go there, and just travel there and see with your eyes what's happening. And oftentimes you will get a lot of inspiration from these travels and from these trips, of things that you might not be able to even imagine when you're sitting in your office. And I also wanted to kind of add to what was said in terms of, the data is really just telling you part of the story. And really to complete that picture, you need to be there and talk to the people. And so I think, so that part of the process is really, really, integral to the success of research in this area. And I think one point is about the training of the people. And I find that, that's actually very, very important if you want your work to really have impact eventually, right? If you do not want your work to remain just a publication in a top journal and remain conceptual, and you really want to deliver impact and help the people that you intend to help when you started the research, is that you need to work with those people to develop whatever solution you want to deploy in the field. I had this experience, right, when we were trying to help a nonprofit to develop a kind of a market optimization tool to help the stakeholders, the farmers, producers in their platform to decide where to sell their products. And then initially, being in a very resourceful community, as at MIT, we have all the kinds of optimization tools and softwares at our hands to implement, right, the model. But then when we talk to our partner, you quickly realize that they do not have the resources to actually do that. They couldn't afford buying those software licenses, right, to deploy those software algorithms. So what we ended up have to do is that go back and look for open source, right, softwares and re-implement all the tools and algorithms using the lowest cost, free of charge kind of software tools. And that enable the organization to actually take it on and implement and pilot in their system. So I think that part of it is implementation, is training, but you're also doing capacity building, right, with your partners. Right? Before the collaboration, they are doing everything manually, and now at the end of the collaboration, they now have all this software and data analysis skills to actually scale the solutions and scale the models within their network. And so I think that is also a very rewarding part of the research journey. It may not be a publication, but it's actual implementation and delivering impact in the real world.
I think that's a spectacular place to end. Thank you all so much. Let's thank our panelists. Really appreciate all their insights. It was a great conversation.